Among his many publications, Dennis Taylor is the editor, together with David Beauregard, of Shakespeare and the Culture of Christianity in Early Modern England. This anthology includes a variety of articles addressing topics related to those of this institute, and is introduced by Professor Taylor's sweeping and entertaining analysis of the various questions raised. A graduate of Holy Cross, Professor Taylor proceeded to graduate work at Yale University, completing his PhD in English literature in 1966. After teaching at Bowdoin College and at the University of California, Santa Barbara, which we would like to think is almost as lovely as it is here, he began in 1971 a lengthy and fruitful tenure at Boston College, which includes a course with, to me, the deeply appealing title, The Literature of Spiritual Quest, with a wonderful reading list, many works of which we read here with our own students. Professor Taylor has also served as the chair of the English department at BC and has been editor of BC's journal Religion and the Arts from 1994, emeritus editor from 2008. We see amongst his extensive publications an abiding interest in Thomas Hardy, as well as Shakespeare, but perhaps more notably a remarkable breadth of literary interest, and one discerns there a profound spiritual quest of literature. I would also like to mention Professor Taylor's decades-long involvement with Haiti relief, a project close to the hearts of many here at Portsmouth. Further, I would add that the professor's knowledge extends well beyond the Elizabethan court and right on to the handball court, as he has been an active supporter of that sport at BC. Today's presentation is entitled The Tempest and Catholic Exploration of America. Professor Taylor notes in his introduction to Shakespeare and the Culture of Christianity the sensitivity of the question of Shakespeare's Catholicism to English identity, remarking, as Shakespeare goes, so goes the nation. As we turn to the Tempest and to the New World, one wonders if the stakes are now raised and whether, as England goes, so goes the world. Well, perhaps that phrase expresses a sentiment too Victorian. In any case, we are grateful to Professor Taylor, who now brings this Catholic question to our own shores, and that we have the opportunity with his assistance and with Shakespeare's to further our own spiritual quest. Professor.
Thank you very much. My wife asked me yesterday what I was talking on, and I said, the Tempest and Catholic Exploration of America. She said, oh, you mean the Portuguese and Spanish? And I said, no. Ooh, mistitled. It's the Tempest and English Catholic colonization of America in the 16th century and early years of the 17th century. And she said, but there was no English Catholic colonization of the Americas in the 16th century and the early years of the 17th century. And I said, that's right. That's my little riddle serving as an epigraph to this talk. I'm a little unused. Oh, it's working. Okay. There is a handout, I don't know, of a chronology. It's not as essential to the talk as Professor Kilroy's was, but if it is available, it might be passed out. The great question about Shakespeare's Tempest is, what does America have to do with the play? The play is about a European ruler, Prospero, deposed from the dukeship of Milan and exiled with his daughter Miranda to an island somewhere in the Mediterranean. The plot seems to be an entirely European affair, with the usurpers on their boat captured by Prospero and put through a series of ordeals that lead eventually to their repentance and the restoration of Prospero to his kingdom. We even have a royal wedding, Miranda and Prince Ferdinand, with not quite the splendor of William and Kate at Westminster, but with its own evocation of a contemporary wedding, that of James I's daughter, the Princess Elizabeth, and the Elector Palatine at the court of King James. The Tempest was performed by King James himself and performed a number of times to celebrate the coming of this royal wedding. America is nowhere to be seen in all this. And yet the sense of America is all over the play. There is a reference to the Bermudas, from which Ariel gathered his dew. There is Caliban, with his name evoking the anagram of a New World cannibal. There are various images seemingly drawn from accounts of New World exploration, like Ariel's St. Elmo light that plays over the Mass. And there are many descriptions, like this one, if I can sum it up. Caliban. I read it from this guy. You can read it. I prithee, let me bring thee where crabs grow, and I with my long nails will dig thee pig nuts, show thee a jay's nest, and instruct thee how to ensnare the nimble marmoset. I'll bring thee to clustering filberts, and sometimes I'll get thee young scamels from the rock. Wilt thou go with me? Very evocative of travel accounts to America, but it's always been hard to nail down the provenance of these American tales. The consensus is that Shakespeare was influenced by a contemporary shipwreck, reports of which filtered back to England just at the time of the play's composition in 1611. A key report was William Strachey's account of the wreck and redemption of Sir Thomas Gates upon the islands of the Bermudas. In 1609, Gates had been sailing to John Smith's famous colony when he crashed. The report of this crash, dated 1610 but not published yet, was not published before the Tempest, so Shakespeare would have had to access it in manuscript. So it's a little doubt whether he would have seen it. And in any event, there is a sense that the play's American contexts are much deeper and older than the Gates Bermuda expedition. Indeed, that expedition was only the latest of many that had powerfully impinged on Shakespeare's imagination since he was a child. And an analogy would be the way in which stories of space travel influenced our baby boomers. But again, what does America have to do with the European plot? And what, anyway, is the play about? What is the real world reference? What is its context in Elizabethan, or now Jacobean England, that would give it a vital contemporary interest to its viewers, as we have seen Professor Kilroy explain with Romeo and Juliet, their aspect of As You Like It, then our very what did you talk about? What is it? Henry VI. I'm having a lot of lapses like that recently. There's so many details in this talk. Yesterday morning I couldn't decide whether Prospero was the Duke of Milan or the King of Naples. The Tempest plot, basically, is that of the unjust usurpation of a rightful ruler and his eventual reinstatement and reconciliation with his enemies. Usurpation, reconciliation, Father Peter Millward, the great pioneer, and always locating the resonance of this kind of story in the contemporary scene. The play evokes a utopian vision, and no wonder that Thomas More's Utopia, along with Montaigne, is evoked early in the play. It is a vision where a torn and divided polity is reunited. Now, Shakespeare, since Tilliard and long before, had been known as the great chronicler of dynastic divisions. And there was often a sense that when mainstream critics described that division, they were still talking about the War of the Roses, as though it were still going on. When in fact, as many of the scholars here have pointed out, the contemporary war for Shakespeare was the Catholics and the Protestants. So if Shakespeare's Tempest is a play that allegorized in some sense, alluded in some sense, fictionalized in some sense, contemporary division, usurpation of a rightful realm, restoration, it must be allegorizing the Reformation division of the 16th century and pointing to some form of reconciliation. This reconciliation, as many have pointed out, is Shakespeare's great project. And we are still trying to sort out the elements that go into that reconciliation. In any event, The Tempest provides us with a model of the return of the old order, an order that is regarded as unjustly discarded and now rightfully restored. So I return to my obsessive question: what does this play, allegorizing the reconciliation of a European religious conflict, have to do with America? Here, I need to veer sharply into a topic that would seem to have nothing to do with America. It is a topic as little known now as the topic of Shakespeare and Catholicism was little known before the scholars of this conference got to work some years ago. The topic is Catholic exploration of America, I should say colonization of America, in the 16th and early 17th century. The title, as my wife noted, would seem to denote the thing that isn't, just as Catholic Shakespeare once denoted the thing that isn't. Where and what was English Catholic exploration of America before Shakespeare wrote The Tempest? It was less an actuality than an idea, but an idea that had enormous imaginative potential for an impressionable youth like Shakespeare. The idea of Catholic colonization of America became a reality after Shakespeare died, of course, in the settlement of Maryland by the Calvert family in 1634. But the idea, and even partial realizations of the idea, had been in the air long before. And here we meet a person whose name may be unfamiliar even to the Catholic scholars here, George Peckham, P-E-C-K-H-A-M. Peckham participated in two intersecting stories that have immense interest. The first story is his participation in the recent Catholicism of England. The second story is his role as a pioneer of an American vision for a Catholic American colony. The two intersecting stories are so important that it is astonishing that one person, George Peckham, should play such an important part. What we know of Peckham's reticent career is as follows. He was often arrested for recusancy, notably on suspicion of hosting camping and other priests in 1580 and 81, again arrested in 1583 and 84. In 1586, he participated in the important Catholic planning meeting at Hurleyford, Berkshire, with William Byrd, Robert Southwell, Henry Garnet, William Weston, and others, a meeting which eventually led to a network of Catholic establishments in every county in England. After this, Peckham was arrested again. In 1602, he was under arrest, and Sir Thomas Arundel, a reticent colleague, gave shelter to his wife. Most amazingly for us, it is at his estate in Denham, Buckinghamshire, just a little northwest of London, that those famous exorcism meetings occurred the exorcisms described and mocked by the Protestant divine Samuel Harson in his declaration of egregious popish impostures, and drawn on for the language of Edgar in Shakespeare's King Lear. As a result of these exorcisms, Peckham's estate was forfeited to the state in 1595. So we can say that this particular Peckham story climaxes in King Lear. The other story in which he participates climaxes in the Tempest. Peckham died in 1608, shortly before the writing of the Tempest. The other Peckham is so anomalous, the Catholic projector of an American colony, is so anomalous with the first that it is tempting to think we are dealing with two different persons, not the only Elizabethan to which this problem applies. Of course, we can see a kind of initial parallel. Just as Peckham wants to establish a network of Catholic contacts in his English setting at that Hurleyford meeting, so now he will look to establish a network of colonial contacts in the American setting. Now I go to my high school lessons in geography and exploration. English exploration had begun with the big pirates and adventurers with fabled names like John Cabot, John Hawkins, Francis Drake, Martin Frobisher, John Davis, who had many motives: get gold, attack the Spanish, find the Northwest Passage, and such. A key figure for Shakespeare's early imagination was probably Sir Francis Drake, who completed his voyage around the world in 1580 when Shakespeare turned 16. Francis Drake was probably Shakespeare's Neil Armstrong. But not yet in this history had colonization become a major theme for the English. The big name in the inaugurating of attempts to colonize America was Sir Humphrey Gilbert, a Protestant, a fascinating figure, a ruthless scholar, to use an oxymoron, who was a great enterpriser and visionary of academies and social programs and political schemes and settlement ideas. He had a lot to do with John Dee, the famous Magus, who supported Gilbert's enterprises, both visionary and geographical. Gilbert's greatest vision was that of a colony in the New World. His great project achieved its climax in 1582 when Gilbert outfitted ships aimed at Norumbega, ambiguously New England, Maine, Northern Virginia, Nova Scotia. The colony was envisioned as a place, Gilbert said, of learning, lectures, scholars, and other goodly and godly uses. Gilbert made it only to the Avalon Peninsula of Newfoundland, where he took possession of St. John's for the Queen on August 5th, 1583, a date that Newfoundland still regards as the birth of the British Empire, or Commonwealth. Let me switch to a map if I can. This is a 1588 map. A big yellow blob way over to the side there, and going down to that what looks like an island, it's really a peninsula, is Newfoundland. St. John's is the tip of that yellow on the right. Next to it is Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia, by the way, famous for a much more famous lost colony, right? The lost colony of Acadia, when the French Catholics were thrown out by the British and American Protestants, and many of them ended up as Cajuns in Louisiana, celebrated by Longfellow in Evangeline. What I'm claiming today is that Shakespeare is the Longfellow for the Avalon province and St. John's and other similar possible Catholic colonies in the New World. This illustration is good also for your sense of Norumbega, which you can see stretching from Nova Scotia on the right all the way to Virginia. So it was a vague and vast and differentiated notion. Tragically, as he sailed away from Newfoundland, Gilbert went down on his ship, clutching a copy of Moore's Utopia. Gilbert himself is a little like Prospero and might have been a partial model in his interest in occult sciences, his learning of humanism, his combination of contemplation and ruthlessness. In an earlier 1577 travel scheme, Gilbert with John Dee had recommended that the Queen settle the area around Bermuda and use it as a pivot point for exploration. This might have been an earlier source of Shakespeare's interest in the idea of Bermuda. In any event, Gilbert's apocalyptic finale occurred in 1583 when Shakespeare was 19. But there was more in the event to impress Shakespeare than just Gilbert and his high Protestant adventure. And before opening the curtain on this other amazing phenomenon, let me note that in these years, when the story of English colonization was heating up, the story of repressive persecution was also heating up. In 1577, Cuthbert Maine became the first secular priest to be hung, drawn, and quartered. In 1577, the same year, Bishop John Whitgift made an official visitation to Stratford to search out reticence. And it was interesting at this time that John Shakespeare's strange decline began and that William left school. In 1578, the year when Gilbert was given a charter for the New World, Sir Francis Walsingham began a 5-year reign of terror, according to one scholar, by means of an extensive spy system seldom equaled and never surpassed for efficiency in England. In 1581, reticency fines were dramatically raised, and Campion and others were executed. In 1583, the year of Gilbert's grand journey to colonize the Americas, there occurred the Somerville plot, with the result that Edward Arden, Mary Shakespeare's relative, who had been prosecuted by Sir Thomas Lucy of the deer hunting fame, was executed. In 1584, an act declared that all priests still in England were treasonous, and 7 Jesuits were executed. In 1585, the government passed an act for the utter extirpation of popery and extended the penalty for treason to all lay persons who assisted the priests. These two narratives, travel and reticence, come together in the figure of George Peckham, who became an associate of Gilbert in order to promote Catholic travel. The idea of exporting Catholics to the New World was tolerated by the government as a way to deal with the Catholic problem, and it was not uncontroversial. The Vatican opposed the Peckham plan because it feared it might undermine Catholic resistance in England. But for desperate Catholics, it was a way out, physically and imaginatively. So Peckham became an important investor in Gilbert's enterprise to obtain settlement space for Catholics in the New World. An associate of Peckham in his plan was Thomas Gerard, a recusant from Lancaster, and father of the important Jesuit priest John Gerard, later famous for his autobiographical account of recusant suffering in England. I was reading the Shakespeare papers. Has Shakespeare been brought up yet? Don't know about Shakespeare. You can ask. Thomas is mentioned as hanging around Thomas Hesketh's estate, to which Shakespeare with his play clothes went. So he's all these incestuous connections. Another association of Peckham was Sir William Catesby, father of the gunpowder Catesby. And that first slide Oops. Well, that first slide, actually, you had seen up on the board a Burleigh agent writing to Lord Burleigh in 1582, a typical statement about this time. There is a muttering among the papists that Sir Humphrey Gilbert goeth to seek a new-found land. Interestingly, the literal notion of Newfoundland. Sir George Peckham and Sir Thomas Gerard goeth with him. I have heard it said among the papists, they hope it will prove the best journey for England was made these 40 years. Gilbert was aware of the Peckham motive. Do you love it? What? What?
Your remote control.
Is it normal? Oh, we'll do that. Okay. That's too bad. That's a really good picture. Gilbert was aware of Peckham's motive. And between the two men, there was a little bit of the right hand not seeing what the left hand was doing. That is, Gilbert was all for colonizing America as a Protestant colony loyal to the Queen and the Church of England, and winking at the fact that Peckham was participating in the same project in order to insert a space for Catholics and Catholic Christianity. Both used the term Christianity in talking about England's missionary activity. And one of the slides is just a bunch of, oh good for you. Let me try this. Yeah, there it is. Thank you very much. These are official documents associated with the trip. And as you go down them, you can see the use of the word Christian in the various documents. And there's a good amount of ambiguity about whether this Christianity mentioned in these documents is Protestant Christianity, Catholic Christianity for Peckham, or some kind of hybrid. And in fact, Gilbert and Peckham may have had a common vision of a new ecumenical world. Gilbert, as we have seen, was influenced by More's Utopia, by the Neoplatonic currents in 16th century England, by the new Sidneyan humanism, fiercely patriotic against papal power, but oddly open to differences in religion. One important theme, by the way, I need to emphasize, is that colonial exploration was a way that the writers had of talking about what they wanted to see back home. In other words, utopian descriptions of American colonies were ways of talking about what I just said. The colony was to be a model for the Commonwealth back home. And this will bear on our argument about the American context of the Tempest, since it's about an island that has implications for Naples and the land back home. In any event, Gilbert in 1582, 1583 assigned Peckham 8 million acres of Norumbega, plus several islands. So this was a very serious project. Peckham's own idea was more sophisticated than just setting up a Catholic colony, partly because that would have been impossible anyway. What he wanted was something very relevant to this conference and relevant to the kind of debate that kind of lies underground in this conference. Does Shakespeare envision a return to Catholicism? Even a concerned return to a kind of Reformed Catholicism, Mary's Tudor style? Or does he envision some integration of the old and the new order? The Elizabethan and Jacobean ages were increasingly characterized by proposals for a new ecumenicism both elements, either elements, will be reintegrated into the tolerant pluralistic state. A tolerant pluralistic state never did happen in these years, but this did not prevent the visionaries of Henry Constable of Santa Clara from indulging in utopian fantasy. I would include Shakespeare among these visionaries, though the question remains, was the union that Shakespeare envisioned under the allegory of the Yorks and the Lancasters, or the union of the Montagues and the Capulets, or whatever, was this union fundamentally a return to Catholicism with some Protestant and secular elements added? Or did Shakespeare want a more radical synthesis of Catholicism and modernity, proleptic of Vatican II, or something even more radical? Without answering this question, and it has been answered in various ways, notably by the scholars here present, my point is that the Tempest constitutes, in the end, such a vision of reconstituted unity. And Shakespeare's model, and the reason for the American atmosphere of the play, is Peckham's vision of a Protestant colony in which Catholicism was tolerated. And it was a vision that was supported in the early obscure years of the 16th century by very important people like Sir Philip Sidney. It was a powerful, though now little seen current in the early modern period. Thus Sidney, a Protestant Irenicist, Irenic, I-R-E-N-I-C, supported Gilbert and the early Peckham Agreement. Gilbert assigned Sidney some 3 million acres, and in 1583, Sidney made an agreement for an exchange of some of this land with Peckham. Peckham may have used Sidney's name to attract supporters. Mendoza, the Spanish ambassador, said that Sidney was an important intermediary for the Catholics. Scholars here are aware of Sidney's connection with Campion, a connection developed by, of all people, Catherine Duncan Jones. Perhaps her investment in Sidney's Catholic sentiments exhausted her ability to believe in Shakespeare's Catholic sentiments. I am assuming that such a vision was a powerful fancy in the minds of recusants from the time of George Peckham. I was trying to remember the name of a bibliography of recusant novels published by a scholar from Washington. I couldn't remember, but there are scads of recusant novels. And this is the example of one that kind of captures the kind of imaginative sense of what I'm talking about. The hero of this novel struggles with his Catholic conscience. The thought of the new Western lands brought a ray of hope to his mind. His cousin had told him of Mr. Raleigh's half-brother, Mr. Humphrey Gilbert, who had a scheme of planting a colony in the Americas where English Catholic recusants, with the permission of the Crown, should live on an equality of religious freedom with the other settlers. Some new-found land instead of England, Norumbega instead of Suffolk. What did it matter? But this, he told himself, was an idle dream and a coward's dream at that. What had Father Parsons said about the chalice that Christ's followers in England must drink if they were to be found worthy of him? I now have to admit that Peckham never set foot in the New World. His own recusant difficulties prevented his embarking with Gilbert physically on that ship in 1583. And when Gilbert sank in that year, so did the great Catholic project of colonization to the 16th century. Peckham was arrested then for recusancy, and the other competing narrative took over his life. As David Quinn says, a great scholar of these journeys, this effectively put an end to plans for an English colony for some 20 years. So if you have your chronology, what we have covered so far are the years from 1497 to 1589. 1497 being the key year when John Cabot began his mischief. I mentioned Richard Eden, 1555, one of many, many accounts of travel because it uses the word setibus, of course, used by Shakespeare as the goddess worshipped by Caliban's mother, Sycorax. 1577, Drake's Around the World. And 1583, Gilbert arrives at St. John's, Newfoundland. George Peckham immediately wrote a report, a true report of the late discoveries by Sir Humphrey Gilbert. A report that's constantly cited in colonial accounts of colonialist accounts and post-colonialist accounts of travel to America, because it says a lot of interesting things about the relationship between European culture and native culture, the different motives of the aristocrats and the common people on board the boat, different attitudes toward the natives, whether empathic, to convert, to exploit. None of these scores and scores of books mentions the Catholic dimension of Peckham, which was his primary motivation. So, the vision of English Catholic colonization did not die, however, at this point. Its resurrection was largely due to the participation of Shakespeare's famous patron, the Earl of Southampton, who was a kinsman of Peckham and sympathetic to his plans. But here we enter an even more obscure tract of history than the Peckham years. But it is a tract of history most proximate to the Tempest. How much time do I have left? I know we are running.
How much do you need, Dennis?
Well, 15 minutes?
Yeah, perfect.
In 1602, Southampton invested in the American journey of Captain Bartholomew Gosnold to make reconnaissance of the area aimed at in 1582 for the Catholic settlement following Peckham's original plans. And all these journeys I'm about to describe follow the template laid down by the Peckham-Gilbert plan. And all these journeys I'm about to describe, almost all of them involve Catholic participation. It was very obscure what the Catholic motive was. Gosnold's journey ended up in Massachusetts and was described by John Brereton, an Anglican priest, in a work entitled A Brief and True Relation of the Discoveries of the North Part of Virginia. Where Brereton would say things like, as you can see there, well, in mid-May, did sow in this island wheat, barley, oats, and peas. The Tempest, Ceres most bounteous lady, thy rich leaves of wheat, rye, barley, vegetables, oats, and peas. You can see these kinds of verbal parallels between these journeys I'm about to describe and the actual language in Shakespeare's play. At this point, you can kind of be following the chronology from 1602 down. That's just the outline of my remarks. At this point, at the very beginning of the 17th century, another Catholic name comes into importance. Sir Thomas Arundel, a reticent and friend of Peckham, who had sheltered Peckham's wife in 1602 during one of Peckham's bouts of imprisonment. Arundel and Southampton agreed in 1604 to cooperate on the new Peckham-style plan. They were supported by a mysterious Tristram Winsley, a veteran soldier and Catholic activist who re-argued the Catholic scheme. We only know about him because Parsons complained about Tristram Winsley to the Vatican for his pushing this old Peckham plan that would milk the good resistant Catholics out of England. The result of this cooperation between Southampton and Arundel and Winsley was the voyage of 1605 by Captain George Weymouth on a boat that included some of Arundel's Catholic staff. The story of the voyage was told by a James Rosier in a 1605 account, and there's a lot of evidence, I'm just relying on the scholars, that James Rosier was a Catholic priest. Rosier's account included idyllic descriptions of St. George's Harbor, Maine, as ideal for habitation and the spread of, quote, Christianity. Again, we sense an elusive Catholic strand in the Protestant exploration. But you notice in pursuit of Prospero's Isle, we moved from St. John's to Cuddy Hunk, off the tip, Cape Cod, the western part, and now to St. George's Harbor, Maine, as the focus of these ambiguously Catholic participated plans. In 1606, 300 Catholics planned to go to Virginia, but the plan came to nothing and was eclipsed by something more famous, the founding of the founding of Jamestown in 1607. Peter Millward notes that a Virginia company had Catholic support in the hope that it might bring a measure of toleration, if only in exile. This is from Shakespeare's papers. Interestingly, the first president of Jamestown was a man named Edward Maria Wingfield, who was apparently a Catholic, which is why probably he only lasted 4 months. He was prosecuted for atheism, misuse of the Bible, not going to church, and other things that his commentators, again I'm relying on them, assume he was a Catholic. His family biographer later indignantly rejected this allegation because he said, of course, the president of Jamestown could not be a Catholic. But we've heard an argument about someone closer to home. Another journey to the New World closed in 1607. Going to skip ahead, it's on your chronology. 1609, Lord Arundel planned a Catholic settlement. 1610 saw the first English attempts in 1583 to colonize Newfoundland at Cooper's Cove. Its founding made a deep impression on the public mind. According to the commentators, the Tempest was written, it was estimated in 1611, in the midst of all this recent history. So the contents are much larger than the Bermuda pamphlets. So we've seen a series of metamorphoses of the original English settlement in America with an obscured Catholic participation from Norumbega to St. John's, Newfoundland, to Cuddy Hunk, Massachusetts, to St. George's, Maine, to Jamestown, Virginia, and then back to Cupid's Cove, Newfoundland. And so, by a commodious vicus of recirculation, I would argue, into Prospero's Mediterranean island. In summary, and I'm skipping a paragraph on Calvert in Maryland, fascinating stuff, but it's after the Tempest. In summary, America was the promise of a utopian freedom for Protestants seeking to come out from under the restrictions of the Elizabethan government and the Church of England, though a promise semi-concealed under the patriotic rhetoric of settling America for England and extending her political and religious influence. Overlaid on this Protestant plot was the Catholic hope for a utopian freedom that would lift Catholics out of under both Protestant and English oppression. An Englishman from a patriotic Catholic family would thus have a multi-layered response to stories of exploration and settlement. He would share in the excitement of this utopian adventure. He would take pride in English expansion and nationalist triumph. He would resonate with Protestant hopes for even greater freedom, and he would seek a space for his Catholic heritage in this expanding freedom. At the same time, this utopian hope would be qualified, as it traditionally was, by serving as a projection of what he really wanted at home, a restoration of the ability to maintain Catholic faith on English soil. Whether Shakespeare experienced such emotions as a young adult in Stratford is indeterminable, but some of the oddities of the Tempest can be understood if seen in the light of a fully comprehensive view, Protestant and Catholic, of the high romance of English maritime colonization. To move to the Tempest, very quickly, it was the Tempest that led me through a series of steps to these Catholic travelogues. I was impelled by the fundamental question, how do the Tempest's American context relate to the European tale of an exiled ruler putting back together like Humpty Dumpty his old kingdom? I don't know where the aha first occurred, but at some point the key fit the lock. The opening storm and the banter of boatsmen and aristocrats is so much like scenes of American ships, especially Gilbert. The shipwreck was then immediately juxtaposed in scene 2 with the careful explanation by Prospero of the dynastic plot, the usurpation and exile, and of an earlier voyage with Prospero and Miranda on their own journey of exile to the island. Immediately here, still in scene 2, that this later wreck is being used by Prospero as an auspicious opportunity, and then Prospero returns toward Ariel. I'm going to let you go through the plot yourself with the implications. But the one thing I would emphasize is that the Tempest seems to be about two royal marriages. The marriage of the King of Naples' daughter, Claribel, to the King of Tunis. This is the marriage which the ships of the usurpers were returning from. They are intercepted by Prospero, who injects a very different dynastic marriage, the marriage between Ferdinand and Miranda. Very evocative, this play with marriages of James I's intention to marry his children, one to a Catholic princess, the other to a Protestant princess, in order to achieve an ecumenical reconciliation of the European divisions. So that, for example, Gonzalo's summary statement, if I can find it, was Milan thrust from a land that his issue should become kings of Naples, oh, rejoice beyond a common joy, and set it down on gold and lasting pillars. In one voyage, did Claribel, her husband, find Tunis, and Ferdinand, her brother, found a wife, for he himself was lost. Prospero his dukedom in a poor isle, and all of us ourselves where no man was his own. The whole thing has become beyond a common joy, two complementary dynastic marriages simultaneously with Prospero's recovery of his kingdom via this poor isle with its American context. It is not unreasonable to see this poor isle as a gleam in the eye of George Peckham and William Shakespeare. I wanted to end with the renunciation speeches by Prospero. You know them well, and the final epilogue with its complaint that all our rebels now are ended as one. I'll drown my book is another. This is the famous epilogue, whose Catholic context David Beauregard has explicated. But there's a problem about this epilogue. Why the melancholy and why the farewell? For what is Shakespeare depending on for his audience to do? And why the contradiction? The play has ended with the prospect of Prospero's triumphant return to Naples as a rightful king, and yet in the epilogue, Shakespeare says it is all up to the audience whether he will return or not. What does that mean? Just two little paragraphs. I think Shakespeare, in his renunciation of magic arts, is recording a sense of exhaustion, not just with playwriting, but with the great reunification project that has motivated his playwriting. He has done all he can in the world of drama and its fictional universe to image a reunification of old and new England, the old religion and the new currents, with forgiveness all around. But it is not up to him to achieve this reunion. He can only image it in his art. But ultimately his art is impotent in itself. It is up to the English people, his audience, to decide what their future will be, whether the old Catholicism will survive or be extinguished, or whether it will be reincorporated into the English character in a second spring. The verdict is still out. One final irony might be recorded. None of the great English colonizing projects of the 16th century, Protestant or Catholic, was successful, and of course the Protestant-Catholic split remained and became permanent. The Elizabethan Catholic project of settling a land apart is little known because it came from nothing, and another lost colony, Roanoke, that was another topic, has since occupied our imaginations. The 16th century Catholic colonizers' most important success might simply be the Tempest, a late embodiment of an old utopian hope to find a new world where an old wrong could be righted. The road from Moore's utopia in the first half of the 16th century to the Tempest at the beginning of the 17th century is long and various, and it finally leads to a fictional island and a fictive world where reconciliation is an achievement only of the imagination, such as Shakespeare's version of the English Catholic Acadia. He never lived to see Maryland. And I just have to show you my pictures, and I'm done. This is an astonishing picture. It's in the town of Dedham. It's the Peckham Manor. Anybody know Dedham? It's a tiny little village. Right up the street is the little church where the Peckhams are buried. In the church, the statues of Edmund Peckham, who was George Peckham's son. But this place is amazing. You can see the sign, warning, guard dogs on 24-hour patrol. This house is the confluence of everything I've been talking about. This is where the exorcisms were taking place. This is the major house and the reconciliation networks. This is the place where Peckham lived and planned the English Catholic colonization of America. All these incredible currents coming to bear in this incredibly obscure and forbidden place, one of the most important houses in England. So my moral for you is, go to Denham. Thank you for putting on your lunch.
Thank you. It was very interesting. One of the things that really caught me in this conference is really the influence of the Catholic teaching in Shakespeare that I really never thought about it until today. And the reconciliation that you are talking about, and also like in the last play in Romeo and Juliet, I mean, they could be the last part that is not mentioned when the two houses mainly are being destroyed by hatred with each other. They try to reunite it, and for me, the old order, which is Juliet in this case, and the new order, which is Romeo, they are both threatened if they are not going to be reconciled. And I think Shakespeare is really giving us a warning that we will be without any order if it's no reconciliation. Talking about the old world, the new world, and Christianity is kind of in shatters right now.
I hear you. And the sadness doesn't go, I could say much better. The families are reconciled in Romeo and Juliet, but at the cost of the sacrifice of these two beautiful people. What a terrible cost. But there is a reconciliation.
Wonderful talk, Professor Taylor. Also, I wanted to say that there was an instance in which a very bad portrait of Elizabeth was found in Bermuda, and apparently she didn't allow things that showed her bad teeth or such things. But anyway, it was found in Bermuda and made people suspect that it was the Catholics at work reading that portrait. Do you comment on that, would you?
I'm just happy with that little story.
Oh, yeah. It just came out in the news about a year ago.
Nothing to say about it. That's my prejudice.
Two small things. Was he related to Robert Peckham? You talk about writers of novels, and Maurice Baring wrote one called Robert Peckham, who died in exile in Rome. And as a Catholic, I think he came from Devon, so there was another.
Well, George's son was Edmund, the figures. Edmund had a son, might have been wrong, I can't remember the name of the son. The Peckhams, interestingly, by the way, had theater connections. They owned the land on which Burbage built the theater, and they sued to get it back. So they're very much part of that scene as well. Interesting, but I don't know about Robert. I'll follow it up though.
My other question, you did mention Prince Henry, who was very in favour of fitting out a ship. In fact, he did fit out a ship to go to the New World, and that it should be a very moral ship, and the crew should have rules of how to behave on the ship. And of course, he's rather a candidate for Ferdinand, isn't he? He was due to marry a Catholic.
Yes, much to his annoyance, because he was a fervent Protestant and hated the notion of marrying a Catholic princess. And James finally got his wish to marry a child of a Catholic when he married Charles, Queen Henrietta of France. And that, another fascinating subject of the masks. Henrietta, famous for her masks, the development of Ben Jonson and Nico Jones, using the masks as allegories of the reconciliation of warring houses, according to Erica Beaver's wonderful book on the image of the mask in Elizabethan England. And you remember, at the heart of the Tempest is the mask of Iris and the marriage of Ferdinand and Miranda. And you pointed out, actually, in your book, that the name Ferdinand might evoke the name Ferdinando, the first name of Lord Stanley, who might have been Shakespeare's first patron, and therefore a very ecumenical man himself, as far as those Catholic contexts are concerned.
Let's go to lunch.